The most iconic cars in movie history: a single car from a 1977 film sold at auction for $4.6 million. Not a real working vehicle. Not a collector's classic from a racing dynasty. A prop. A modified Lotus Esprit that drove underwater in a James Bond film and somehow became one of the most valuable automotive artifacts in human history. That number tells you everything you need to know about the relationship between Hollywood and the automobile. Cars in movies are not just transportation. They are characters. They are emotion. They are memory. In the next 10 minutes, we are going to walk through the most iconic cars ever put on screen, explore why certain vehicles became cultural legends while others were forgotten the moment the credits rolled, and reveal the one surprising truth about how a car becomes iconic that almost nobody in the film industry actually planned for. Some of these choices will make perfect sense. One of them is going to genuinely shock you. Stay with us. To understand why movie cars matter so deeply, you have to go back to the earliest days of American car culture. The 1950s were when the automobile stopped being a machine and became a symbol. Freedom, rebellion, prosperity, danger. Hollywood understood this immediately. Films like Rebel Without a Cause and American Graffiti did not just feature cars. They used cars as extensions of character, as visual shorthand for who a person was and what they wanted. A teenager in a fast car in 1955 was communicating something specific to an audience that understood the language completely. By the 1960s and 1970s, car culture and cinema were deeply intertwined. Studios began working directly with manufacturers. Manufacturers began seeing films as the most powerful advertising platform in the world. And audiences began forming emotional attachments to specific vehicles that would last for decades. This is the ecosystem that produced the legends we are about to discuss. Let us start with what is arguably the most recognizable movie car ever made. The Aston Martin DB5 first appeared in Goldfinger in 1964 alongside Sean Connery, and it changed automotive marketing forever. Aston Martin was a respected British sports car manufacturer, but it was not a household name globally. Within months of Goldfinger's release, demand for the DB5 exploded. The car appeared in 6 subsequent Bond films, and to this day, it is the single vehicle most associated with the franchise. When the DB5 appeared in Skyfall in 2012, audiences responded with a visceral emotional reaction that no amount of advertising budget could have manufactured. The car had become mythology. Then there is the 1968 Ford Mustang GT390 from Bullitt, the film starring Steve McQueen. The 10-minute chase sequence through the streets of San Francisco is still considered the benchmark of automotive filmmaking. McQueen, who was himself an accomplished driver and racing enthusiast, insisted on performing many of the stunts himself. The Mustang reached speeds exceeding 110 miles per hour during filming. 2 hero cars were used during production. One was destroyed. The surviving car disappeared for decades and was recently discovered in a barn in Mexico, still bearing the damage from production. When it sold at Mecum Auctions in 2020, it fetched $3.74 million. Here is something that most people do not realize about the Bullitt Mustang. Ford had already planned to discontinue the Highland green color option. After the film's release, demand was so overwhelming that the color remained in production for years. A single movie changed a manufacturer's entire product strategy. Now consider the General Lee. The 1969 Dodge Charger from the Dukes of Hazzard is one of the most culturally complicated vehicles in automotive history. The show ran from 1979 to 1985 and featured the car so prominently that it was essentially a third main character. Approximately 329 Chargers were used during production, mostly destroyed in the famous jump sequences. Today, a screen used General Lee in authenticated condition can fetch upward of $1 million. The Charger's broader cultural revival, which continues to this day through Dodge's muscle car lineup, owes a significant debt to that television series. But here is what nobody talks about when it comes to movie cars. The most iconic vehicles in film history were almost never chosen for performance reasons. They were chosen for visual reasons. Shape. Proportion. The way light moves across a body panel. The DeLorean DMC-12 from Back to the Future is the perfect example of this truth. The DeLorean was, by virtually every objective automotive measure, a mediocre car. Its PRV V6 engine produced a modest 130 horsepower. Road tests from the era were politely critical. The company went bankrupt in 1982, just 3 years after production began. And yet the DeLorean is one of the 5 most recognized cars on Earth because of 2 things. Its stainless steel body caught light in a completely unique way on camera. And its gull-wing doors opened upward in a manner that looked, to a 1985 audience, exactly like the future should look. Director Robert Zemeckis and production designer Lawrence Paul chose it because it looked right. That decision transformed a commercial failure into a permanent cultural icon. The same principle applies to the Batmobile, specifically the 1989 version designed by Anton Furst for Tim Burton's Batman. That vehicle was built on a modified Chevy Impala chassis and stretched to approximately 21 feet in length. It had no real performance credentials. What it had was a visual language so aggressive and so dark that it told you everything about the world of that film before a single line of dialogue was spoken. Replicas have sold for over $250,000. The design influenced automotive aesthetics for years after the film's release. Let us talk about Christine. The 1958 Plymouth Fury from John Carpenter's 1983 adaptation of the Stephen King novel is a fascinating case study in how a car can transcend its role as a prop and become genuinely frightening. Carpenter used approximately 17 Plymouth vehicles during production, carefully selecting the 1958 Fury because its design, with those aggressive tail fins and its particular shade of red, is threatening on screen in a way that a more neutral car simply would not. The self-repairing sequence, where the crushed car rebuilds itself, used a technique involving inflating bladders inside the body panels filmed in reverse. It remains one of the most effective practical effects sequences in horror history. And it made an entire generation reluctant to look at classic muscle cars the same way again. Then there is the Ferrari 250 GT California Spider from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Interestingly, director John Hughes could not secure an actual Ferrari for production because the insurance costs were prohibitive. The cars used in the film were custom-built replicas designed by Medina Design, built on Ford chassis. They were so convincing that many audiences assumed they were real. When the film became a cultural touchstone, demand for the actual 1961 Ferrari 250 GT California Spider surged. A genuine example sold for $17.6 million at RM Sotheby's in 2015, a record price significantly influenced by the car's Hollywood association. What this pattern reveals is something genuinely counterintuitive about the relationship between automotive value and cinema. Films do not just reflect car culture. They actively create it. They establish what is desirable, what is aspirational, what carries emotional weight. The manufacturers who understand this have leveraged it strategically. Those who have missed the opportunity have watched competitors use the same tool to build decades of brand loyalty at relatively low cost. The deeper truth is this. Every car on this list became iconic not because of horsepower figures or quarter-mile times. They became iconic because a filmmaker used them as a tool to make an audience feel something specific. Speed, freedom, danger, wonder, nostalgia. The car becomes associated with that feeling permanently, and the feeling outlasts the film, outlasts the decade, outlasts every trend in between. That is why a prop Lotus Esprit sold for $4.6 million. That is why a barn-find Mustang with production damage is worth nearly $4 million. That is why the DeLorean, which failed utterly as a car, is beloved by millions worldwide. The cinema gave these machines something no engineering department could design and no marketing budget could manufacture. It gave them a soul. Before you go, if you learned something valuable today, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to AutoVision Daily for a brand new video every single day. We will see you in the next one.